A millionaire fell in love with and married a waitress. But what she confessed at the reception left the entire room in shock. Before we dive into the story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss the next stories. Stay tuned until the end, things are about to get intense. Now, let's get into it. Leo Martinez had always been different from the other kids in Clearwater. While they were riding bikes down dusty back roads and hanging out at the local diner, Leo spent his afternoons holed up in the family garage, piecing together outdated computers and scribbling code on notepads. There was a quiet drive in him, a hunger for something more than his small-town life could offer. He didn't want to take over the family's hardware store, like his father had hoped. Leo's mind was always in the future, somewhere beyond the blue-collar streets he grew up on. His family didn't quite understand him. His father, Luis, was practical, the kind of man who believed in working with his hands, not tinkering with machines. Leo's mother, Maria, always offered a kind smile, but even she worried that Leo's ambitions might be too big for a boy like him. But Leo didn't care. He had a vision, and it was all his own. By the time he hit high school, Leo had taught himself enough about coding to build simple websites, and he was constantly absorbing information about technology and business strategies. Every spare moment was spent reading articles, watching tutorials, and practicing. His grades weren't just good, they were stellar, and his teachers started noticing. One of them, Mr. Franklin, the computer science teacher, saw something in Leo that reminded him of the tech pioneers of Silicon Valley. He pushed Leo to enter a national tech competition, knowing the boy had the talent to make waves. Leo wasn't convinced at first. The idea of competing against kids from wealthier schools, with more resources, made him hesitant. But there was something about the challenge that excited him, something that lit a fire in him that even his own doubts couldn't extinguish. He worked tirelessly for months, coding through the nights, balancing schoolwork, and perfecting his project. When the day of the competition came, Leo walked into the auditorium with little expectation. He felt out of place among the other contestants, many of whom had polished presentations and advisors from prestigious tech programs. But when it was his turn to present, Leo poured his heart into his demo, a unique software that streamlined small business operations, making it easier for mom-and-pop shops, like his family's, to compete in a digital world. His presentation was a hit. By the end of the competition, Leo had not only won first place, but also caught the attention of several recruiters from top universities. The prize wasn't just a trophy, it was a full scholarship to a prestigious tech and business program at one of the best universities in the country. The scholarship changed everything. For the first time, Leo saw a clear path to the future he'd always dreamed of. He packed up his belongings and left Clearwater for the big city, ready to dive into a world of possibilities. University life was exhilarating, and for Leo, it was like stepping into the future. Surrounded by other bright minds, he felt a surge of creative energy. His days were packed with lectures, group projects, and endless hours in front of a computer screen, but Leo thrived on it. He wasn't just a student, he was someone with a vision, and he knew that success wasn't going to come to him just by acing his classes. He needed to build something. It was in his second year when he met two students who would become his closest collaborators, Nina, a software engineer with a passion for coding algorithms, and Marcus, a business major with a knack for making connections. They clicked immediately. The three of them were an unstoppable team, blending their strengths to create something that was more than just an academic project. Late one night, as they worked together in the campus library, Leo had an idea that would change everything. They were discussing the growing demand for tech education and how traditional schools weren't adapting fast enough to meet it. Why not create an online platform that taught coding, web development, and business skills to people from all walks of life? It could be affordable, accessible, and more flexible than any other education system out there. Marcus was hooked immediately. Nina, ever the pragmatist, pointed out the challenges: they would need funding, support, and a massive amount of content. But Leo was determined. He knew that they had stumbled onto something big. They worked day and night, pulling in every favor they could and using every spare second to build the platform. They called it Skill Forge, a place where people could forge their skills in tech and business. At first, it was slow. They ran virtual ads, but the traction wasn't there. Weeks went by, and it felt like they were screaming into the void. But Leo wasn't about to give up. He refined the marketing strategy, drawing from everything he'd learned about audience targeting and digital platforms. Then, suddenly, things started to shift. The right people noticed, and enrollment numbers began to climb. Word of mouth spread, and within months, they had thousands of students signed up. The more users they gained, the more content they produced, bringing on expert instructors from across the globe. What set SkillForge apart from other platforms was its personal touch. Leo believed in making education not just accessible, but engaging. There were live interactive sessions, personalized learning paths, and a support network for students to connect with instructors and peers. It wasn't long before SkillForge became one of the fastest-growing tech education platforms in the market. By the time Leo turned 25, his vision had come to life in a way he never imagined. SkillForge had gone from a university project to a multi-million-dollar enterprise, and Leo had become a self-made millionaire. He was invited to speak at tech conferences, meet with investors, and share his story on panels. But no matter how much his business grew, Leo stayed grounded. He didn't just want to be rich, he wanted to make a difference. Through SkillForge, he was empowering thousands of students, giving them the tools to break into industries that had once seemed unreachable. People from small towns like Clearwater, or from disadvantaged backgrounds, were now finding new opportunities, thanks to the education they could access through his platform. Leo Martinez had learned to navigate the pressures of meetings, investor calls, and endless discussions about scaling his business, but some days were heavier than others. On this particular day, the weight of his ever-growing responsibilities felt a little too much, and he needed a break. After a long afternoon of back-to-back conferences, he found himself wandering the streets near his office, seeking a moment of quiet. That's when he spotted a small cafe, tucked into a corner of the busy city block. Its dark wood and glass exterior, framed by ivy and shaded by a few trees, looked like the perfect place to grab a quick coffee and recharge. He stepped inside, appreciating the warm glow of the low lights and the inviting scent of fresh pastries. The space was quiet, and only a few customers sat at tables, absorbed in their books or laptops. As he moved toward the counter, his eyes landed on a woman standing behind it, carefully balancing a tray of freshly brewed coffee. She glanced up just as he approached, offering a bright smile that instantly made him feel a little lighter. Her name tag read Mia, and from the first moment, something about her drew him in. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice smooth and cheerful, with a hint of curiosity. "Just a coffee," Leo said, feeling strangely relaxed for the first time all day. "Whatever your favorite is." "Bold choice," she teased lightly. "I hope you like adventure, because my favorite is pretty strong." He smiled back, feeling something he hadn't in a while, a kind of easy, genuine interest in someone new. She busied herself behind the counter, expertly grinding beans, steaming milk, and pouring a perfect espresso shot. As she worked, he couldn't help but notice how focused she seemed, how present she was in the moment, a stark contrast to his own whirlwind of thoughts and obligations. "Here you go," Mia said, placing the cup in front of him. "One cappuccino with an extra shot, just the way I like it." Leo took a sip and immediately appreciated her recommendation. "This is great." "Thanks, Mia." "You're welcome. Let me know if you need anything else," she replied, starting to turn away. "Actually," Leo said, stopping her before she could leave, "I could use a recommendation for something else." She raised an eyebrow, curious. "For what?" "A break," he confessed with a soft laugh. "It's been a long day, and you seem like you'd know a good place to unwind." Mia paused, then nodded knowingly. "Well, if you're looking for something low-key, there's a park just a couple blocks down. It's my go-to spot when I need to clear my head." "Sounds perfect." "Thanks again." Leo walked to an empty table by the window and sat down, sipping his coffee and watching the world move by outside. But his thoughts kept returning to the brief interaction with Mia. She wasn't just friendly, there was something more, something that intrigued him. He noticed the way she moved with purpose, and how her eyes lit up when she talked about her favorite drink. There was ambition behind that smile. Later, as he stood to leave, Leo noticed that Mia had returned to the counter, reading a travel magazine during a lull in the rush. It seemed like the perfect excuse to strike up another conversation. "Planning your next trip?" Leo asked, leaning against the counter. Mia glanced up, surprised at first, but then smiled. "Something like that. I'm just daydreaming, really. I've always wanted to travel more, but, well," she shrugged. "Work keeps me grounded." Leo nodded. "I get that. But you know, sometimes you've just got to make the time." "What's on your list?" Her eyes brightened at his question, and she set the magazine aside, leaning in slightly. "New Zealand. I've always wanted to hike through the mountains there, see the lakes, experience the culture. It's one of those places that feels almost magical, you know?" "I do," Leo said, his curiosity growing. "What's stopping you?" Mia sighed, resting her chin on her hand. "Mostly practicality. Travel isn't exactly cheap, and running off to New Zealand isn't something I can just do on a whim. But one day, I'll make it happen." "Let me guess, you've got a business idea in mind to get you there," Leo said, sensing there was more to her than just dreams of far-off places. A smile tugged at the corners of Mia's lips. "You're not wrong. I've been toying with the idea of starting a travel business. Not just booking trips for people, but helping them have real, meaningful experiences, off the beaten path." Leo was impressed. It wasn't often that he met someone who shared his entrepreneurial spirit, especially not in a cafe on a random afternoon. He leaned in a little closer, intrigued. "That's a great idea. There's a real market for that kind of thing, especially these days. People want something authentic." "That's what I think," Mia agreed. "It's all about showing them more than just the touristy spots, helping them really connect with a place. I've been planning it in my head for a while now, but I'm still figuring out the next steps." Leo studied her for a moment. Mia wasn't just a charming face, she was driven, intelligent, and had the kind of ambition he recognized in himself. It was rare to meet someone who could talk so casually about dreams that were so big. "Well, if you ever need some advice," Leo offered, "I've got a little experience with startups. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime, and I can help you with those next steps." Mia raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Really? You work with startups?" Leo nodded, realizing he hadn't even mentioned what he did for a living. "Yeah, I run an online education platform. Started it back in college with a couple of friends, and it's grown pretty quickly." "Online education, huh?" Mia asked, genuinely interested. "That's impressive. Maybe we should trade advice. I could use a little entrepreneurial wisdom." "I think we'd make a good team," Leo said with a grin. He reached for a business card and slid it across the counter. "Here's my info. Whenever you want to talk travel business or just grab coffee, give me a call." Mia took the card, her fingers brushing his lightly as she accepted it. "I just might." As Leo left the cafe, he felt lighter than he had in weeks. The city buzzed around him as always, but this time, he didn't feel the weight of his usual routine. Something had shifted. Mia had shifted something. There was potential there, potential for more than just business. And Leo had never been one to walk away from potential. Leo hadn't planned for things to move this fast, but life had a funny way of speeding up when it felt right. From that first conversation at the cafe, everything between him and Mia seemed to fall into place naturally. There was no awkwardness, no hesitation. They were two people who clicked in every way that mattered, and neither of them wasted time playing it slow. Their first date, at a cozy little restaurant overlooking the harbor, set the tone for everything that followed. Leo had chosen it because of its reputation for good food and even better sunsets, but as he sat across from Mia, watching the golden light from the setting sun touch her face, it felt like a scene pulled from a daydream. She laughed at his stories about his early days trying to build Skillforge, the long nights, the frustrations, and the unexpected wins. And when she shared her own plans for her travel business, Leo saw the same spark of ambition in her eyes that he knew lived in his. "I think your idea's brilliant," Leo told her as the waiter cleared their plates. "You've got a vision, Mia. It's just a matter of execution." Mia smiled, leaning back in her chair, her eyes dancing in the twilight. "That's the part I'm still figuring out. But I'll get there." "I know you will," Leo said, meaning every word. "Maybe I could help. Talk strategy." "Maybe," she teased. "But let's keep it casual. No business tonight." He grinned at her, already appreciating her ability to draw boundaries between work and life, something he often struggled with. They finished their meal with easy conversation, their chemistry undeniable. After that night, their weekends became an adventure. Sometimes it was as simple as a walk through the city, discovering hidden spots neither of them had visited before. Other times, Leo would surprise her with spontaneous trips out of town, short flights or drives to nearby cities, where they'd explore, taste the local food, and soak in new experiences. One weekend, Leo booked a last-minute getaway to a coastal town a few hours away. They spent the day hiking through cliffs that dropped into the ocean, their laughter carried away by the wind as they navigated the rugged trails. That evening, they shared a seafood dinner by the shore, the salty breeze lifting Mia's hair as she talked about all the places she still wanted to visit. "Someday, we'll go," Leo said, his hand wrapped around hers as they walked back to their small seaside inn. "Wherever you want. New Zealand. Japan. Peru. You name it." Mia looked up at him, her eyes soft in the fading light. "You really mean that?" "Of course. I want to see the world with you." She smiled, but there was something more behind it, a mixture of excitement and vulnerability. "It's crazy how fast this has happened, isn't it?" Leo stopped, turning her toward him. "Yeah. But it doesn't feel wrong, does it?" Mia shook her head, her smile widening. "No, it feels perfect." That was how it was between them. Things moved quickly, but nothing ever felt rushed. It was as if they were both speeding toward the same destination, and now they had someone to share the ride with. As their relationship deepened, Leo began introducing Mia to the people who mattered most to him, his close-knit group of friends and business partners. The first time was at a dinner party Marcus had organized, an evening of good food, good wine, and conversation that flowed easily. Leo had been a little nervous, not about Mia herself, he knew she was more than capable of holding her own, but about the mix of his personal and professional worlds. He needn't have worried. From the moment she stepped into the room, Mia charmed everyone. She was witty and warm, engaging in conversations about everything from travel to technology, sliding effortlessly into discussions with Leo's colleagues. Marcus, ever the skeptic, pulled Leo aside at one point during the evening. "She's impressive," Marcus admitted, his brow lifting slightly. "Smart. Real. I like her." Leo chuckled. "I knew you would." The next time they gathered, it was with Nina and her partner at a local wine bar, and again, Mia fit right in. By the end of the evening, they were already making plans to meet up again, a testament to how seamlessly she had become part of Leo's world. For Leo, seeing Mia with his friends felt like confirmation of what he already knew. This was more than just a passing romance. It was deeper, stronger. Their connection ran through everything they did together, from the smallest moments to the big conversations about their future. One evening, after another spontaneous weekend trip, they sat together on the balcony of Leo's apartment, overlooking the city lights. Mia leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the cars move like tiny dots below. "You ever think about where this is going?" she asked softly, her voice barely louder than the breeze. Leo glanced down at her, his arm wrapped around her waist. "All the time." Mia shifted, looking up at him, her eyes searching his. And I see it going somewhere real," Leo said honestly. "I know we've only been together a few months, but I don't want this to just be some chapter that ends. I want to build something with you. Mia smiled, and there was that vulnerability again, the kind that made her even more beautiful in Leo's eyes. I feel the same way. It's just fast, you know? Sometimes fast is good, he said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. It doesn't have to be complicated if it's right. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, as if her answer was written in the way her lips pressed against his. They sat like that for a while longer, not needing to fill the space with more words. As the weeks rolled into months, Leo found himself sharing more of his world with Mia. What had started as spontaneous trips and light-hearted moments turned into late-night conversations that dug deeper, revealing sides of each other that weren't always polished. It was during these talks, sometimes over wine, sometimes just sitting on the couch after a long day, that Leo began to let Mia into the corners of his life he usually kept closed off. Running a business as successful as Skillforge wasn't all glamorous. There were the constant meetings with investors, the late nights spent troubleshooting platform issues, the endless cycle of ensuring that everything stayed ahead of the competition. To the outside world, Leo seemed unstoppable, someone who had taken an idea and turned it into something incredible. But behind that success was pressure. And in Mia, he found someone who didn't just nod sympathetically but listened. Really listened. One evening, after a particularly stressful day, Leo sat with Mia on his apartment balcony, the night air cool against his skin. He leaned back in his chair, looking out over the city's sparkling skyline. Sometimes, it feels like it's too much, Leo admitted, his voice quiet but steady. There's so much riding on this company. The investors, the employees, the students. It's like I'm always one decision away from everything falling apart. Mia looked over at him, her eyes soft but focused. I can't even imagine how much that weighs on you, she said, leaning in closer. But you don't have to carry it all by yourself, you know? You've got a team, people who believe in what you've built. You need to trust them more. I do, Leo said, but his brow furrowed. It's just hard sometimes. When you're the one who started it all, it's tough to let go of control. Mia smiled gently. I get it. But you've got to give yourself a break. I see how hard you push yourself, and it's amazing, Leo. But you also deserve to have time for yourself. To just breathe. Leo turned to her, appreciating how she cut through his anxiety with calmness. He could see the genuine concern in her expression, and it soothed something inside him. You're right, he said after a moment. I'm not great at that. It's why I love being with you. You remind me there's more to life than just the business. Mia smiled, brushing her hand over his. That's because there is. Don't forget that. As their relationship deepened, Mia began to open up about her own dreams too. She had always been driven, but now she was starting to put those dreams into something tangible. Leo had already heard about her desire to start a travel company, but now it wasn't just an idea, she was shaping it into a plan. They sat together one evening at her apartment, papers spread across the kitchen table. Mia had sketched out her ideas on notebook pages, each one filled with details about the kind of travel business she wanted to build. Not the typical tourist package trips, but something much more personal. She envisioned creating custom travel experiences for people who wanted more than just a vacation, they wanted an adventure that would change them. I want to offer people a chance to see places differently, Mia explained, her eyes lighting up as she flipped through her notes. Not just the popular spots, but the hidden gems. I want them to connect with the local culture, meet people who live there, experience something real. Leo watched her as she spoke, feeling the same excitement from her that he had when he started Skillforge. It was contagious, and he couldn't help but lean in, offering suggestions. You've got something great here, Leo said, studying her outline. But you need to think about how you're going to scale it. I love the personal touch, but to grow, you'll need a solid plan for expanding. Maybe start with a few key destinations where you have strong local contacts, then build from there. Mia nodded, scribbling notes as he spoke. That makes sense. I've been thinking about starting with Europe, there are so many places I already know. And I've got some friends in Greece and Italy who could help with logistics. That's a great start, Leo encouraged. And don't be afraid to bring in a partner or two. You can't do it all alone, and you shouldn't have to. Mia smiled, her pen pausing. It's funny. That's kind of what I keep telling you. Leo laughed, realizing she had a point. Fair enough. They worked late into the night, bouncing ideas off each other, their energy feeding off one another's excitement. It wasn't just about planning a business anymore, it was about building something together, supporting each other's goals in a way that felt natural and effortless. Leo found himself falling even more in love with Mia during these moments. There was something so authentic about her, she didn't put on airs, didn't try to impress him with anything other than who she truly was. He admired her grounded nature, her ability to dream big while staying connected to what mattered. It was a rare quality, and he felt lucky to have found it in her. Mia, in turn, appreciated Leo's passion for his work, but also his humility. For all his success, he never acted like he was above anyone. He listened to her ideas with the same intensity and respect as he did with his business partners, and she knew that wasn't something she could take for granted. As their connection grew stronger, so did their understanding of each other. They weren't just two people in a relationship, they were partners, pushing each other to be better, to dream bigger. Mia helped Leo realize that life didn't always have to be about work, that there was joy to be found in the spaces between. And Leo helped Mia see that her dreams were within reach, that she had the skills and vision to turn her ideas into something real. 6 months had flown by in what felt like a heartbeat. Leo had always been the type to plan things carefully, to think through every decision with precision, but when it came to Mia, there was no hesitation. Everything about their relationship felt effortless and right, so much so that Leo found himself thinking about the future in ways he hadn't before. He wanted to build a life with her, not sometime down the road, but now. That's how he found himself planning something he never thought he'd be doing, organizing the perfect proposal. It wasn't easy to surprise Mia. She had an uncanny knack for reading people, especially him. But Leo was determined. He spent weeks preparing, making sure everything was set down to the last detail, working around her schedule so she'd be none the wiser. The hardest part had been finding the right moment, one that would be perfect and unforgettable, but still intimate. It had to reflect what they shared, a deep connection that was grounded in both romance and reality. One Friday afternoon, he told Mia to keep her evening free. He didn't give away much, just enough to intrigue her. She asked a few playful questions, trying to pry details from him, but Leo only smiled and shook his head. "Trust me," he said, his eyes sparkling with the secret. He picked her up at dusk, the last of the sunlight fading into a soft gold as they drove toward the city skyline. Mia, ever curious, tried to guess where they were going, but when the car turned into a private helipad, her breath caught. "Are you serious?" she asked, a laugh escaping her as she glanced over at Leo. "Very serious," he said, feeling the thrill of the surprise finally hitting her. "I figured we could take the scenic route tonight." She shook her head in disbelief, but her smile was wide as she followed him toward the waiting helicopter. As they buckled in, the pilot greeted them with a nod, and within moments, the rotors began to spin, lifting them into the sky. The city unfolded beneath them, its twinkling lights stretching in all directions, the bustling streets below transformed into something quiet and serene from this height. Leo watched Mia's face as she leaned toward the window, her eyes wide with awe as they soared higher, the world beneath them becoming smaller and smaller. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her hand reaching out for his. Leo laced his fingers through hers, his heart beating faster, not just from the excitement of the ride, but from what was coming next. As they flew over the city, Leo took a deep breath, his free hand slipping into his jacket pocket, feeling the small velvet box that had been resting there all night. He waited for the right moment, and when they reached the edge of the skyline, where the city met the distant hills, he gently tugged her hand. "Mia," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the helicopter. She turned to look at him, her face glowing in the soft light, and for a second, Leo felt a wave of emotion hit him. "I knew from the first time we met that you were special," Leo continued, his thumb brushing over her hand. But what we have, it's more than I ever imagined. You've changed my life in the best way, and I can't picture a future without you in it. Mia's eyes softened, a flicker of surprise and love crossing her face. She didn't speak, but the way she looked at him told Leo everything he needed to know. With his heart pounding, he pulled the velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing the custom-designed ring he'd spent weeks perfecting. A single, brilliant diamond sat in the center, surrounded by tiny sapphires that caught the light and shimmered like the city below them. "Mia," he said, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of nerves in his chest, "will you marry me?" For a moment, time seemed to hang between them, the city lights glowing in the distance, the sky stretching wide and open around them. Mia's eyes filled with tears, her lips parting in a soft gasp, and then she smiled, a smile that lit up everything. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Leo. I'll marry you." Relief and joy flooded Leo all at once as he slid the ring onto her finger, their hands trembling slightly. Mia leaned in, her arms wrapping around him, and their lips met in a kiss that felt like a promise. It wasn't just the proposal, it was the start of something bigger, a life they would build together. When they finally touched down, the world felt different. Their connection had deepened, their future suddenly more real, more tangible. Mia held her hand up, admiring the ring in the moonlight, and Leo couldn't stop grinning. "I still can't believe you pulled this off without me finding out," Mia teased, glancing at him with a playful look. "You're sneaky, Martinez." "Had to keep you on your toes," Leo said, kissing her temple. "Besides, I figured you deserved something special." As they drove back, the conversation naturally shifted to the wedding, and by the time they reached Mia's apartment, they were already tossing around ideas. They both agreed on one thing, they wanted something small, intimate. No grand spectacle, just the people who mattered most. Mia's face lit up as she talked about an outdoor ceremony, maybe in a vineyard or a garden, somewhere beautiful and serene where they could celebrate with their closest friends and family. Leo loved how simple her vision was, just like everything else between them, it was about the love they shared, not the production. Over the next few weeks, they began making plans. They settled on a gorgeous garden venue just outside the city, a place filled with wildflowers and tucked away from the bustle of everyday life. It was perfect. The guest list was small, just close family and a handful of friends, but that's exactly what they wanted, something real, something that reflected who they were. As they worked through the details, flowers, music, the menu, Leo found himself falling even more in love with Mia. She was thoughtful, grounded, and everything about their wedding plans felt as natural as their relationship. There was no stress, no unnecessary drama. Just love. Leo and Mia arrived at the quaint countryside garden the day before the wedding, everything falling into place just as they had envisioned. The air was filled with the scent of wildflowers, the rows of white chairs lined up perfectly along the manicured lawn, and the sound of a small stream gurgling nearby. It felt magical, and for Mia, it was the perfect backdrop for their intimate ceremony. The excitement of the day washed over them both, the kind that made every little detail feel bright, sharp, and full of possibility. Mia's parents, Hector and Sofia Ramirez, arrived a little later in the afternoon. Leo had only met them once before, briefly, during a quick visit months ago, but this time felt different. They were here to see their daughter marry, to witness the union of two lives. Mia greeted them with open arms, pulling them close, her excitement undeniable. She wanted this moment to feel right, to be a celebration of love and family. As Mia and Sofia chatted about last-minute details in the shade of a large oak tree, Leo noticed a subtle tension in Hector's expression. The man was quiet, his smile thin, and his eyes darting toward Leo more than once. At first, Leo shrugged it off as pre-wedding jitters, nerves were natural. But something about the way Hector was watching him felt different. There was weight in the air, something unspoken. Later that evening, while Mia was in the garden with her mother, Hector approached Leo. There was no preamble, no softening of words as Hector fixed him with a steady gaze. "Leo, we need to talk." The tone was unmistakable. "Serious?" Leo nodded, gesturing toward a small path that led to a quiet seating area away from the house. They walked in silence, the tension thickening with each step. When they reached the small stone bench, Hector wasted no time. "I didn't know who you were until today," Hector began, his voice low but firm. "I didn't make the connection before, but now that I see your full name, and I've done some research." Leo felt a chill run through him. This wasn't about the wedding jitters. This was something deeper. "What do you mean?" Leo asked carefully. Hector's expression hardened. "Your company, Skillforge, it destroyed my business." Leo blinked, stunned. His mind raced to connect the dots, but Hector continued before he could respond. "We ran a chain of tech education schools in the city, my wife and I. We built it from the ground up, spent years developing a reputation for hands-on, personalized education in programming and technology. But when your online platform launched, it offered the same courses, more affordable, more accessible. People stopped enrolling in our physical classes. We lost everything, Leo." Leo felt his stomach drop. He had heard similar stories before, from competitors who couldn't keep up with the wave of digital education that platforms like Skillforge had unleashed. But he had never imagined Mia's family would be among those affected. His business wasn't built to tear anyone down, but in a rapidly changing world, not everyone could keep up. "Hector, I didn't know," Leo said, his voice quiet, trying to find the right words. "I never meant for that to happen." Hector's eyes were sharp with pain. "Whether you meant it or not doesn't change the fact that it did. We lost everything. We had to sell our properties, lay off our staff. We're barely getting by now." Leo felt a wave of guilt crash over him. He knew how hard it was to build something from the ground up, and to hear that his success had inadvertently caused another family's hardship, Mia's family, no less, was a blow he hadn't seen coming. Before Leo could respond, Mia appeared, her eyes widening at the sight of the two men sitting together. The tension was palpable. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice cautious as she approached. Hector stood, his expression softening when he saw his daughter, but his shoulders still stiff with unresolved anger. "I was just explaining something to Leo," he said, his voice strained. He turned to Mia, his eyes filled with the weight of what he'd just revealed. "Mia, Leo's company, it's the reason we lost our business. The reason we went into financial ruin." The color drained from Mia's face as her gaze snapped to Leo. She looked between the two men, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. "What?" Leo stood, his heart pounding in his chest. "Mia, I didn't know. I had no idea my company had affected your family like that." Mia's breath hitched as she processed the revelation. "Your company?" Her voice trembled. "Leo, why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know," Leo said, stepping closer to her, but Mia took a step back, her eyes wide with shock and hurt. "I would never have let this happen if I had known." Tears welled in Mia's eyes, her hands shaking as she tried to grapple with the enormity of what her father had just revealed. The man she loved, the man she had been ready to marry in less than 24 hours, was responsible for her family's downfall, even if unintentionally. Her whole world had just shifted beneath her feet. I can't believe this," Mia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Leo, how could I not have known?" Hector put a hand on Mia's shoulder, guiding her gently away from Leo. "Mia, I think we need to talk about this as a family," Hector said softly. "You shouldn't rush into anything tomorrow." The words hung in the air, and Leo felt them like a punch to the gut. He watched as Mia looked at him, her heart visibly breaking as she took another step away. "I need time," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. And just like that, everything came crashing down. The next day, the wedding was cancelled. The chairs were removed, the flowers dismantled. Mia stayed with her parents, her emotions too raw to face Leo. He wanted to talk, to explain, but it wasn't the right moment. Not yet. He understood that. But as he stood alone in the now empty garden where they had planned to start their life together, he couldn't shake the feeling that the future they had built was slipping further and further away. The days following the cancelled wedding passed in a blur for Leo, though each one felt heavier than the last. He had never imagined that the path to his future with Mia could veer so sharply, leaving him standing on the edge of uncertainty. The flowers they had chosen, the vows they had prepared, everything had dissolved in an instant. Now, there was only silence between them, a hollow space where their plans once lived. Leo tried reaching out to Mia in the days after. He sent her messages, carefully worded, hoping she would at least agree to talk. But her replies were short, distant. She wasn't ready. And so, Leo gave her the space she needed, knowing he owed her that much. But it didn't stop the ache in his chest from growing deeper each time he thought about what had happened. Mia, on the other hand, found herself struggling between her heartbreak and her sense of duty to move forward. She left the countryside and returned to the city, throwing herself into work with a single-minded focus she hadn't known she possessed. Her travel business, the one she'd been building in her mind for years, now became the center of her life. It was easier to work than to think about Leo. Easier to pour her energy into something that gave her purpose, rather than dwell on the devastation that still lingered like a shadow. Each morning, Mia would wake up, make a list of tasks for her company, and get to work: calls to potential clients, partnerships to secure, website updates, marketing strategies. She was a whirlwind of motion, a woman determined not to let the cracks in her personal life show through in her professional one. Still, there were moments, quiet ones, when the grief hit her. Late at night, after hours of exhausting work, she would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering Leo's voice, the way his hand felt when he slipped the ring onto her finger. The look in his eyes when he promised her forever. And now, the reality that their love had somehow gotten tangled up in something beyond either of their control. It hurt. More than she could admit, even to herself. For Leo, things weren't much easier. He returned to the city, too, diving into his company in the same way Mia had, using work as a distraction. He had always been ambitious, but now, there was a frantic edge to his drive. Expanding SkillForge, making deals, managing partnerships, everything became sharper, more intense. But no matter how much he buried himself in work, the guilt never left him. He replayed the conversation with Mia's father over and over in his mind, searching for a way he could have fixed it. Could he have been more careful, more considerate of the smaller companies when SkillForge took off? Could he have prevented the fallout that had destroyed Mia's family's livelihood? The weight of it sat heavy on him, a constant reminder that success came with consequences he hadn't anticipated. He had built his business to help people, to give them opportunities. But he hadn't realized how his success had become a double-edged sword, cutting into the lives of those who couldn't compete. And now, it had cost him the woman he loved. Despite the distance between them, Leo couldn't stop thinking about Mia. He thought about her when he sat in meetings, when he walked into the office, when he came home to an empty apartment. She was everywhere, even in her absence. And the regret gnawed at him, the feeling that if he had only known, if he had only seen the full picture, maybe things wouldn't have ended like this. It wasn't just guilt that kept him awake at night, though. It was the memory of what they had shared, the way they had laughed together, built dreams together. That connection hadn't vanished, it had simply been severed by circumstances beyond either of their control. But could it be repaired? Leo didn't know. As the months dragged on, the silence between him and Mia began to wear him down. He wanted to give her space, but he couldn't help wondering if she still thought about him, if she missed him as much as he missed her. The thought of reaching out terrified him. What if she didn't want to hear from him at all? Meanwhile, Mia was making strides in her own business. She had secured partnerships with boutique travel companies, launched her website, and begun booking clients for specialized trips. It felt good, being her own boss, knowing that she was creating something that reflected her passion for travel. But even as she achieved milestone after milestone, the hollow space in her heart remained. She didn't talk about Leo to anyone. Not her friends, not her parents. It was too raw. But there was a part of her, buried deep beneath the work and the busyness, that couldn't let go of him. She had loved him, deeply, and despite everything, she hadn't stopped. That was the hardest part. Loving someone who had hurt her family, even if unintentionally. As Mia's business grew, so did her sense of accomplishment. But it wasn't enough to fill the void. It wasn't enough to stop the nights when she thought about calling Leo, when she wondered if he had moved on, or if he was as haunted by their separation as she was. In the end, neither of them had truly moved on. They were simply waiting. Waiting for time to heal what had been broken, waiting for the courage to face each other again. Waiting to see if the love they had shared could survive the damage that had been done. The weeks after the wedding were a time of intense reflection for Leo. The weight of everything that had happened, the loss of his relationship with Mia, and the harsh reality of how his company's success had affected her family gnawed at him constantly. His heart ached for her, but more than that, it was the knowledge that his ambition, his dream, had unintentionally caused harm. That thought lingered in his mind like a storm cloud, and it became clear that something needed to change. Leo had built Skill Forge with the intention of empowering people. It was never about crushing competition or taking away anyone's livelihood. Yet, as his company had grown, the market had shifted, and in his drive to expand, he'd lost sight of the ripple effects his success had on others. The realization was like a punch to the gut, but it was one he knew he had to face head-on. One morning, sitting in his office with the city skyline stretching beyond the windows, Leo stared at the endless reports and charts in front of him. His company was doing better than ever, but he couldn't shake the hollow feeling that came with it. Numbers weren't everything, and the people behind those numbers, the smaller businesses, the communities, were what mattered. He had forgotten that somewhere along the way. He called a meeting with his executive team, his mind already racing with ideas. As they gathered around the conference table, Leo stood at the head, his usual confidence laced with a new sense of urgency. "We need to talk about the future," Leo began, his voice steady but firm. "And not just our future, how we're going to grow or where we're expanding, but the impact we're having on the people and businesses around us." His team exchanged glances, confused. Leo had always been about scaling, about pushing boundaries and reaching more markets. This shift in tone surprised them. Leo took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what we do here at Skill Forge and how we've grown. And while I'm proud of what we've accomplished, I've come to realize that we haven't always been mindful of how our success impacts others, especially smaller businesses that don't have the resources to compete with us. That's going to change." One of his senior executives, Nina, raised a brow. "What are you suggesting, Leo?" "I'm suggesting that we start making ethical changes, real changes, to how we operate. We've unintentionally caused harm to smaller companies, and that's not what this business is about. I want us to become partners, not competitors, to those businesses. We're going to start by creating a support initiative for smaller companies, helping them integrate into the digital landscape instead of being pushed out by it." Nina nodded slowly. "You mean, collaborate with our competition?" "Yes," Leo said firmly. "We'll offer resources, training, shared platforms, even funding to help them grow. Instead of outpacing everyone, let's build a network where success is shared. We can still grow, but not at the expense of others." The room was silent for a moment as the team absorbed Leo's words. It was bold, and it was different, but they could see the determination in his eyes. It wasn't just a gesture. This was Leo making amends, correcting a path that had veered too far into profit over people. Over the next several weeks, Leo worked tirelessly with his team to implement the changes. Skillforge launched a new partnership program aimed at helping small tech education companies adapt to the online world, offering them the tools and support to thrive. They also created scholarships for struggling students and free resources for educators who were losing ground to the rapidly evolving digital market. Word of these initiatives spread quickly. Media outlets began picking up the story, framing Leo's efforts as a positive shift in the tech world, a move toward more ethical entrepreneurship. His reputation, which had always been strong, now took on a new dimension. He wasn't just the guy who'd built a multi-million-dollar company, he was the CEO who cared about the people left behind in the rush for success. And it wasn't just the media that noticed. Mia had heard about the changes too. She came across an article one evening while she was browsing online, catching up on the latest business news. At first, it was just another headline, *Tech CEO rewrites the rules of success, Leo Martinez's ethical shift in business star. But then, as she read more, her heart quickened. The article detailed Leo's new initiatives, his decision to take responsibility for the unintended consequences of Skillforge's growth. Mia read every word, her fingers trembling slightly as she scrolled through the story. It was clear that Leo had taken a hard look at himself, at his business, and at the world around him. He wasn't just making a token gesture, he was reshaping his entire approach to success. And Mia knew that this was no small feat. She had seen how driven Leo was, how ambitious. For him to make such a profound change meant that he truly understood the gravity of what had happened. Mia's chest tightened as she finished reading. It was the first time in months that she allowed herself to feel something other than the hurt and anger that had been festering since the wedding. She missed him. God, she missed him. But more than that, she realized that Leo was someone who could own his mistakes, who could learn and grow. He was still the man she had fallen in love with, but now, he was someone who had taken responsibility for his impact on the world. That night, Mia lay in bed, her mind racing. She had spent the past several months building her own business, finding her footing in a world where she had control over her own destiny. It had been empowering, and she was proud of what she'd accomplished. But despite all her success, there was a void that had never quite been filled. A part of her that still longed for the future she had envisioned with Leo. After tossing and turning, she made a decision. Reaching for her phone, Mia took a deep breath and typed a message she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. "Leo, can we talk?" As she hit send, her heart raced with a mix of anticipation and fear. But she knew it was the right thing to do. Because, despite everything, love was still there, waiting for a second chance. And she was finally ready to see where that chance might lead. The park had always held a special place in Leo's heart. It was where he and Mia had taken their first walk together, a quiet retreat in the middle of the city that had come to symbolize something real, something honest between them. So when Mia texted him asking if they could meet, this was where he suggested. It felt right. It felt like a place where they could start to untangle the hurt and the love that still existed between them. Leo arrived early, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the paths. The trees were thick with leaves, a canopy of green that whispered in the breeze, but Leo's focus was singular. He hadn't seen Mia in months, months that had felt like both an eternity and a moment. His heart raced with anticipation, and a part of him couldn't help but worry. What if the damage was too deep? What if there was no coming back from this? Then, he saw her. Mia walked toward him, her pace steady, her eyes fixed on the ground in front of her until she looked up and saw him standing by the old oak tree where they'd sat together so many times before. She stopped for a moment, as if gathering herself, and then continued walking, her expression soft but unreadable. Leo's heart thudded in his chest as she approached. He felt the pull between them, the familiarity of her presence mixed with the unfamiliar weight of what lay between them now. "Mia," he said softly as she came to a stop in front of him. "Hi," she replied, her voice carrying that quiet strength he had always admired. She gave him a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. They stood there for a moment, the silence hanging between them, thick with all the words they hadn't spoken since the day of the wedding. Finally, Leo gestured toward the bench beneath the oak tree. "Do you want to sit?" Mia nodded, and they walked over together, sitting down side by side, though not as close as they once might have. The space between them felt both vast and fragile. "I'm glad you agreed to meet," Leo said after a pause. "I've been thinking about you. About us. A lot." Mia turned her gaze toward him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and something softer. "I've been thinking about us too, Leo. That's why I reached out." Leo swallowed, his throat tight with emotion. "I know I hurt you," he said quietly. "And I'm so sorry, Mia. I never wanted to be the reason your family went through what they did. I've spent every day since trying to figure out how to fix things, how to make it right." Mia sighed, her gaze drifting out over the park. "I know you didn't mean for any of it to happen. But it did, and I had to deal with that reality. Losing our business, it hurt. A lot. And when I found out about your role in it, it felt like my entire world was collapsing. I understand, Leo said, his voice rough with regret. And I wish I could go back and change it. But I also know that's not possible. All I can do is take responsibility and try to do better. Mia nodded, her fingers absent-mindedly playing with the edge of her sleeve. I saw the changes you've made to Skillforge, she said after a moment. I didn't expect that, Leo. But it showed me that you're not just saying the right things. You're actually doing something about it. Leo glanced at her, his heart aching. I had to. After everything that happened. I realized that success can't just be about the numbers. It has to mean something more. It has to help people, not harm them. There was a long silence between them as Mia let his words sink in. The breeze rustled the leaves above, the soft sounds of the park filling the space where their words hung, unspoken but not forgotten. I missed you, Mia said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked down at her hands, her vulnerability laid bare. I missed you so much, Leo. Leo's chest tightened. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently took hers. Her fingers were warm, and when she didn't pull away, it was like something inside him shifted. I missed you too, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Every day. I thought about you, about what we had, and about what we lost. I don't want to lose you, Mia. I love you. Mia's breath caught, and she looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I love you too, Leo. I never stopped. Even when I was angry and hurt, I couldn't stop loving you. Leo felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was tempered by the reality of the situation. Do you think we can find our way back to each other? He asked quietly. I want to, Mia. More than anything. Mia exhaled slowly, her eyes searching his. I don't know if we can just go back, she said softly. But maybe we can start again. Move forward, together. Leo's heart swelled at her words. That's all I want, he said. A fresh start. To build something even stronger than what we had before. Mia smiled then, a real smile, one that reached her eyes and lit up her face. She squeezed his hand. I think we can do that, she said, her voice steady. I want to try. For the first time in months, Leo felt hope. Real, tangible hope that they could rebuild what had been broken. It wouldn't be easy, he knew that. They had both been through so much, and there was still healing to be done. But they were here, together, willing to try. And that was enough. They sat in the park for a long time, talking about their time apart, about the things they had learned and the ways they had grown. Mia told Leo about her travel business, how it had taken off, and how proud she was of what she had accomplished. Leo shared more about the changes he'd made at Skillforge, and how it had transformed his approach to business. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Leo turned to Mia, a soft smile playing on his lips. So, what now? He asked. Mia laughed lightly, a sound that felt like music to his ears. Now, she said, her eyes sparkling with renewed joy, we take it one day at a time. Leo nodded, his heart full. I can do that. Leo and Mia spent the next few months rekindling not only their love, but also their sense of adventure. They had always talked about traveling the world, but now, with a stronger bond between them and a renewed sense of purpose, it felt like the perfect time to take that leap together. The idea of seeing the world, not just as tourists, but as two people searching for inspiration, seemed to align with this new chapter in their lives. They started small, a trip to Europe, where they spent time walking the narrow streets of old cities, taking in the history, the architecture, the cultures that had shaped these places. In Italy, they wandered through vineyards and dined in small, family-owned restaurants. In Greece, they explored ancient ruins and swam in the crystal blue waters of the Mediterranean. Every place they visited gave them something new to think about, not just about their own lives, but about the world and the people in it. They had endless conversations, often sitting in the middle of some beautiful square, sipping coffee, and watching the world go by. They talked about their businesses, how Mia's travel company was growing steadily, and how Leo's efforts to transform Skillforge into a more responsible and community-oriented enterprise were paying off. But soon, their conversations shifted from themselves to the people around them. They began to notice the disparities between those who had opportunities and those who struggled just to make ends meet. It was in a small cafe in Barcelona where the idea for something bigger was first born. They had spent the day exploring the city, and while the energy of the place was exciting, there were stark contrasts everywhere they looked, wealth and poverty side by side. Leo pointed out a group of young people talking animatedly at a nearby table, clearly full of ideas and passion, but from the way they dressed and carried themselves, it was obvious that they might not have the resources to turn those dreams into reality. Mia watched them for a moment and then turned to Leo, her brow furrowed in thought. "You know," she began, "we've been so lucky. We've worked hard, sure, but we also had opportunities that a lot of people don't. I think about those kids over there, and I wonder how many of them have big ideas, but no way to make them happen." Leo nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "I've been thinking the same thing," he said, his gaze following hers. "What if we could change that? What if we could help people like them, people with potential but without the resources?" Mia's eyes lit up with excitement. "We could do more than just run our businesses. We could give back in a real way. Help young entrepreneurs, people who want to build something but don't have the means to get started." And just like that, their shared mission was born. It wasn't enough for them to focus solely on their own success anymore. They wanted to create something that would lift others up, something that could turn dreams into reality for those who didn't have the same advantages. When they returned home, they got to work immediately. They began to sketch out the details of what would become their joint venture, a foundation aimed at empowering young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. The foundation would offer not just financial grants, but mentorship, guidance, and educational resources, everything a person would need to get their idea off the ground and turn it into a thriving business. Leo and Mia worked tirelessly to build the foundation, leaning into each other's strengths. Mia's knowledge of travel and global networks helped them connect with communities that could benefit most from their programs. Leo's expertise in business strategy and his deep understanding of how to scale a venture gave them the structure they needed to ensure the foundation would be sustainable. It wasn't long before word about the foundation started to spread. They partnered with schools, community organizations, and other businesses that shared their vision. Soon, applications began pouring in from young entrepreneurs all over the world, people with bold ideas but little access to the resources necessary to bring them to life. The foundation's mission was clear: no one should be held back because of where they came from or how much money they had in their bank account. Everyone deserved a chance to build something meaningful, and Leo and Mia were determined to provide that chance. Their lives, once focused on their separate businesses, now became intertwined in the most meaningful way possible. They weren't just partners in love, they were partners in this new mission. Every day, they worked side by side, reviewing proposals, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and watching as the seeds they planted began to grow. 1 year after launching the foundation, they decided to host their first major event, a ceremony where they would present their inaugural grant to a young entrepreneur. The excitement was palpable as they planned the event, making sure it would be a celebration not just of the grant recipient but of the spirit of innovation and community that the foundation embodied. The day of the event was bright and clear, held at a beautiful outdoor venue with a view of the city's skyline. Friends, family, and supporters of the foundation gathered to witness the moment. Leo stood by Mia's side, his heart swelling with pride not just for what they had built together, but for the impact they were about to make on someone else's life. As the time came to announce the first recipient, Mia took the microphone, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This foundation was born out of a desire to give back," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "To help those with dreams as big as ours, but without the resources to make them happen. Today, we're honored to present our first grant to someone who embodies that spirit, someone who has worked tirelessly and has a vision that can change the world." Leo smiled as the young woman they had selected stepped onto the stage. She was full of hope, her eyes bright with the future that lay ahead of her. Mia handed her the check, and in that moment, Leo knew this was just the beginning. The applause filled the air, and as Leo looked out at the crowd, he realized that this, helping others, giving people the tools to succeed, was the most important thing he had ever done. It was more than just building a business or creating wealth. It was about leaving something lasting, something that would continue to grow and impact lives for years to come. He turned to Mia, who caught his eye and smiled, her hand slipping into his. They had come so far together, through love, heartbreak, and healing. Now, they were standing on the edge of something even greater, a future filled with purpose, love, and a shared mission to help others achieve their dreams. And this, Leo thought, was only the beginning.